Longstone can often seem like a sleepy island of tranquility, but there's always a lot going on under the surface. 3 foot down, hard at work 24/7, there are pipes, ducts and cables carrying water, sewage, gas, broadband and mains electricity. And we only ever notice them when something's up. Last year, of course, that something was often the road, and I've been doing some digging myself into the story of Longstone and its underground and overground connections. At Monsall Head, the signs were ominous. The road through Little Longstone was going to be dug up, causing 3 months of traffic disruption, while Severn Trent put in a new water pipe to replace an old one, and a very old one that dated back to 1902. Between Monsall Head and the chapel, the workmen were able to drag the new plastic pipe in 100-metre lengths through the ground using this mechanical mole, which was powerful enough to burst its way through the original pipe, even though the new one had a larger diameter. So, despite January's snow, not having to dig up that part of the road saved them a bit of time. But even so, the job still took 3 months. Now, it's interesting to compare this renewal work with the original job back in 1902, which brought water to Longstone and the surrounding areas from a catchment reservoir up there on Stoke Flats above Froggatt. Back then, the original gang didn't bury the water main deep enough, so it had to be dug up and relayed at the correct depth of 3 foot, all the way from Froggatt to Longstone, and 2 new storage reservoirs that look a bit like flying saucers. Now, you'll know the one above Rowland, but there is another one that's a bit harder to spot. It's here, at the top of the big car park at Monsall Head. Back to 2015, and the houses in Little Longstone had to be disconnected from the old main, which was removed, and reconnected to the new pipe, which slowly snaked its way across the boundary to Moor Road, where the final connection was made on March the 18th. But it was another 12 days before the road reopened, and the 173 bus could return to its normal route. For 3 months, Great Longstone was served by a shuttle bus that ran from Bakewell as far as the Crispin. And Little Longstone's passengers, for the school bus as well as the 173, had to walk up to Monsall Head. Fortunately, the other utility works in the village during 2015 were less disruptive. The arrival of fibre optic broadband only involved a few short trenches and the installation of 3 green cabinets on the village streets.
Down here in the Willows, the Peak Park has been working on an area that used to be sewage beds and before that fish ponds. I'm chairman of Longstone Local History Group, so when I heard that the workmen had unearthed an interesting and mysterious piece of industrial archaeology, I naturally wanted to get down here and see it for myself.
Back in the village, some of our street lights got converted to modern efficient LED technology, but there are still quite a few of the old orange sodium ones left. And that set me wondering just when it was that Longstone got its first street lights, which is why I'm stood here on the corner of Church Lane just at lighting up time on the 14th of January, because it was on this day back in 1912 that, according to the Derbyshire Times, a large gathering of residents witnessed the switching on of Great Longstone's very first gas lamp. Mrs. Eyre, Mrs. Vernon and Leonard Bennett lit one of the lamps. The lights are a great success and very much appreciated already. Gas had arrived in Longstone in the summer of 1911 when the Bakewell Urban District Council extended the main from the old works here at Riverside along the A6 and into Ashford. From there, past the railway station and into Longstone itself, where the main branched and served from the bottom of Moor Road down to the Croft. Now, inevitably, there was some disquiet about this new gas main. People remembered how badly the original water main had been laid, and so naturally they were worried about the danger of explosions. But gas technology had been around for over 100 years. At Bakewell they'd had gas since the 1840s, so some of the big houses in the area had become impatient and they'd installed their own private electric supplies using diesel generators. One of them was Thornbridge Hall, home of George Jobson Marples. Now, in 1911, he invited everyone from the surrounding villages to come here to a garden party to celebrate the coronation of King George V. And that meant that Longstone's own coronation fund could be spent on something else. Back in 1895, Mr. Spanton, the village schoolmaster, spoke to the newly formed parish council about the inefficient and insufficient state of Longstone's sanitary arrangements. In other words, there were too many earth closets too close to the wells where people were getting their drinking water. So the parish council wrote to the rural district council, and they wrote to the district medical officer and asked him to investigate. And within 3 months the rural district council had come up with a plan to connect all the household toilets to a sewer that would run from Moor Road down through the village to the Willows, where the sewage could be safely dealt with. So in 1896 work was continuing on the village's sewer and sanitation, but despite an analysis of the water quality from the village pumps as being not conducive to health, the parish council noted that to deprive the villagers of water from the pumps would be an intolerable hardship. So, not surprisingly, a plan to bring water down from Longstone Moor and charge it to the rates was voted down. 30 years earlier, in the 1860s, Longstone's connection with the outside world took a great leap forward when the Midland Railway Company opened their line from Derby to Manchester. And before long, Longstone Station had a telegraph office, which meant that Longstone people were now connected to the Victorian internet. But they still had to walk or cycle down to the station to send a telegram, until 1900, when the parish council guaranteed £12 a year to subsidise the running costs of a telegraph office actually in the village post office. In 1901, the Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire Electric Power Company was established to supply electricity to the rural parts of the two counties. Great Longstone and the surrounding villages all applied to have electricity brought to this area, and as you can see, they were successful. But it took 37 years. However, in 1902, Longstone was connected to the Stoke Flatwater scheme. Now, that work started at the same time as work started here in the Derwent Valley on the Howden Reservoir. But of course, Stoke Flat was on a much smaller scale, only supplying water to the villages from Eyam through Carver and Hassop to Ashford. And what with the problems with the pipework and various other leaks, it was 1903 before water started flowing out of Longstone's taps. And even then it wasn't terribly reliable. It used to run dry in the height of summer. And that's why the old village pump, which actually stood just about here, survived until the 1950s. According to the parish council minutes, in 1958 it was taken down and removed because the rural district council wouldn't pay to repair it. But there are those who'll tell you that it was removed to improve vehicular access to the pub and other commercial properties. Now, the reason why Great Longstone is where it is because it's on the spring line. The one that fed the pump outside the White Lion was just over there. And this name's a bit of a clue as well. Now, the runoff from the springs, along with any stormwater, would have gone down a drain, down through the village, down towards the Willows, where Anne's having a stroll through the area's checkered history.
During the 18th century there were fish ponds here, which were believed to have been dug to provide the clay to make the bricks to build Longstone Hall. When the new sewer was built in 1896, the relatively small amount of sewage passed down this drain to the Willows, where it settled out and enriched the soil. So the willows, which were used for basket making, had all the fertiliser they needed, and eventually the clean water passed down the stream to the ponds at Thornbridge.
The Royal Mail started carrying the post back in the 17th century, but it wasn't until the 1850s that you could actually send a letter from Longstone, and it wasn't with a letterbox like this. No, in the 1850s, John Lowe, who's a builder, and his wife Sarah, they lived over the road, they acted as a sort of an outpost for the main post office in Bakewell. And by the 1870s, Sarah, who had become Longstone's first postmistress, had moved her business to what is now called the Old Post Office. And she was still here in 1900 when the electric telegraph arrived. And after a couple of years, the people in Longstone were sending so many telegrams that the place became self-sufficient. And that meant that the parish council no longer had to subsidise it. The next new telecommunications technology to arrive here did so in 1913. It was the telephone, and the telegraph pole there shows you where the post office was in that year. Now, Mrs. Annie Green, who was the postmistress, would have had to find room in the shop for a small telephone exchange so that calls could be connected by an operator. Now, she would have been able to do that job herself because there were only 10 subscribers in the village. Anyone else who wanted to make a call had to use the public phone that was actually in the post office, so it was only available in the daytime when the shop was open. Until 1936, when Longstone got a proper red phone box. Well, at 80 years old, it's not surprising she was looking a bit grey recently. Anyway, as you can see, in retirement she's now getting spruced up. Fresh lick of paint, and she's the home of the village's first defibrillator. Longstone's gas lamps had been paid for by the village's George V Coronation Fund, but the running costs had to be met by the wealthier residents, who paid a subscription to cover the cost of the gas and the man who turned them on and off every night. The village streets were lit by gas from January 1912 until April 1938, but we're in the dark as to just where those lamps were, save for the one that was on the corner of Church Lane and Main Street. So, where were the others? They must have been on the gas main, and that ran along Station Road and from Moor Road to the Croft, where the footpath across the fields joined the road next to York Cottage.
But I should say, I'm practically certain there was definitely a gas light here. I'm practically certain about that.
Well, this is as far down the village as the gas main came, and both Martin Oliver and Sheila Hurst, who can just remember the gas lights, are pretty sure that there was actually one just here. The chap who had the job of keeping the village's wicks metaphorically trimmed was Herbert, known to everyone as Daddy Rees. As well as being the lamplighter, he was a plumber and a woodworker, and he lived in Standill Cottage. And he had a workshop across the road where Casey's shop now is. In Longstone Notes, Robert Thornhill describes it as an old barn, and it appears that it was replaced by the shop in 1932, which was when Daddy Rees took a break from lamplighting, but he was back at it in 1935. By now his daily pay had gone up from 7 old pence to 1 shilling, but he was only paid from October to April because they couldn't afford to use the lamps during the summer. Although the council had called a couple of parish meetings asking the villagers to vote on putting the cost of the gas lighting on the rates, they'd always voted no, not surprisingly preferring to leave the task to the generosity of the local gentry and, where necessary, profits from the occasional whist drive. There were only a couple of trains that stopped here in the evening, but it couldn't have been very pleasant in the winter, coming off of a brightly lit train, up the steps, and then walking back to the village in complete darkness. So in 1929, the parish council asked Dr. Skinner, who lived just across the road in Thornbridge Cottage, if he would pay for a street lamp just outside his gates. And surprisingly, Dr. Skinner said yes, but he'd rather wait until electricity was available because an electric light would be cheaper to operate than a gas street light. The parish council were in agreement because everybody expected that the overhead wires would reach here pretty soon. But in fact, they didn't actually get here until 1938. And then in 1939, of course, it all went dark again because of the blackout during the war. Surprisingly, when they installed the 5 gas lamps in 1912, they didn't put one here in the centre of the village. But Martin Oliver's pretty sure he remembers one being somewhere around here from the time when the family lived in the Nook, back in the mid-30s.
We used to live here, and I used to see old Reese come up doing the lamps. I used to look out of the door and see him come up and do the lamps at night, you know what I mean. But I should say definitely was there.
So I checked the parish council minutes, and yes, there was a reference to the fact that an additional lamp was going to be installed on the wall of the reading room, which was owned by the Wright family, and that was in 1931.
About the same time, the Rural District Council built these filter beds to deal with the ever-increasing amount of sewage that Longstone was producing. But the village and its effluent continued growing, and in the 1960s, Longstone kicked up a bit of a stink, in every sense. And so it was connected to the main sewer. And now everything is flushed away to the big treatment works at Pickery Corner. Well, not quite everything.
Friday, we actually got bathwater run down here because the water went blue.
Martin was one of the team from the Peak Park who were here in March 2015 to clean out the silted up drainage channel that runs through the Willows and stop it from backing up again and overflowing into the next field down.
So what we're trying to do now is do a bit of maintenance and try and keep them drills cleared to keep it flowing.
Well, it was the late 30s before electricity started flowing into the Longstone area. Sure, some of the big houses had had their own diesel generators from before the First World War, but it was 1938 before all of the Longstone area got connected to the overhead wires of the Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire Electric Power Company. In November 1937, a parish meeting finally gave approval to put the cost of street lighting on the rates, and the parish council signed up for 8 electric lamps at a cost of £27 a year. So it looks like the end of the road for Longstone's gas lamps would have been Saturday the 9th of April 1938, when Daddy Reese turned the last lamp off at the end of that winter's lighting season. And the man himself went off to leave his mark on a piece of wood, a bit more quietly than this one.
The most obvious result of the work that went on in the Willows in 2015 has been the thinning out of the hazel to improve ground cover for wildlife. But the primary job was to clear this drainage channel, and that revealed a large wooden object at the bottom of the watercourse. It's made of 2 pieces of timber, hollowed out and held together by old nails to make a pipe. The water funnels into it through that hole and then drops down into a culvert, which goes under Cox's Field to the Thornbridge Ponds.
So, what happened to Longstone's old gas lamps. Well, by 1938, Bakewell Gasworks had become part of the Sheffield Gaslight Company, and they weren't interested in buying back the old lamp standards. In fact, they wanted to charge to disconnect them. So Herbert Rees got the job of doing what was happening all over the country, and that was dismantling the old lanterns for scrap. And many of the gas lamp standards survived by having swan neck brackets fixed on the top. Now this one in Great Longstone on Church Lane is the only one of its type still here, but it could never have been a gas lamp because the main didn't come this far, so it appears that the lamp post must have been salvaged and moved from somewhere else.
Well, now it's a year since the work started and I've come to take another look. As you can see, they've repaired the walls that channel water over the mysterious wooden object, and they've covered it in mesh to stop debris getting in and blocking it up again. So I'd like to know more about this wooden piece of industrial archaeology. In the past, there seem to have been several different industries in the Willows. Robert Thornhill's Longstone Notes talks about 18th century brick making and fish ponds. And in the 19th century, and possibly earlier, willows were being grown for basket making. And more recently, this area was a sewage farm. But the nails that hold the pipe together are clearly very old. So it's my guess that this wooden funnel may well have been part of an earlier scheme to keep the stream free of leaves and other debris from the willow trees, so that the culvert couldn't get blocked. But exactly why and when this was placed here remains a mystery.
A bit like the locations of Longstone's enigmatic gas lamps. But I've taken a tour around the village with Martin Oliver, and here's what we reckon. As well as the three lamps we've already mentioned, the fourth was at Orr's Corner, Moor Road, the fifth was on the corner of Station Road and the Green, and the sixth was either outside the chapel or the entrance to the lodge, which was where AEWJ Eyre, the chairman of the lighting committee, lived. When they were converted to electric, the 5 existing lampposts would almost certainly have been adapted with a swan neck bracket, as you can see in this 1940 photo from Hugh Wright's collection. The lamp on the reading room wall was moved across the road onto the green, and the 2 additional ones were at the Myers and Gleeblands. And of course, Dr. Skinner's light near the station meant that in 1938 the village was lit by 9 street lamps. Today, Great Longstone has over 80. I know it doesn't look like that many from up here, but that's because the modern ones have better reflectors and only shine downwards. So let's journey back in time to April 1938.
And then I saw here Herbert Rees, owner 1938, that fixed this cylinder, age 68, April 25th 1938 he fitted this, age 68, born 1869, something 28.
November 28?
Right.
Could be, couldn't it? It could be an no.
Yeah.
The writing is difficult to see, but when Nick Smith was clearing the roof space of Standhill Cottage, he found this support for a copper cylinder on which Daddy Rees had definitely made his mark when he installed it a fortnight after finishing as village lamplighter, at the age of 68. But he wasn't only a plumber, he was also a joiner, and Nick showed me this fire surround that he had made. The plumber come joiner come lamplighter was also a Quaker, which no doubt inspired the subjects that he placed at the focus of his daily life. And another example of his woodworking skill also came to light recently, following a chance conversation with Angela Thornhill. It's a rustic settle, with images of the pump, the cross and St Giles Church. And here's another couple of lost links that have recently been rediscovered that tie in with Anne's description of the history of the Willows. In 2004 there was a letter in Under the Edge about the number of trees that then had recently been felled, So last year's work down there appears to have been the first for 11 years. And regarding the industrial heritage of that area, in 2010 Robert Cumming wrote an article about Bill Pickford's carpentry workshop in the field immediately to the west of the Willows. The corrugated shack isn't there anymore, so this photo's an important record of a lost local history. And of course, in 2015 we lost Heather Reeves, who had been a central figure in village life for so many years. Her family passed some of her local history collection to the Longstone Group, and one of the items that interested me was a small envelope containing 12 local views. The two that show the centre of the village appear to date from the late 20s, but the pictures are very small and it's impossible to read the number plates, although you can make out the name of Orms, the Bakewell grocers, on the delivery van. And this picture of the church, apparently undergoing roof repairs, is another lost link because so far we haven't been able to put a date to it. And the same goes for this British Legion gathering. The village's connections aren't just cables and pipes, but people and events. And something gets lost every time an old photograph gets thrown away, or the only person who remembers its significance dies. Nick Smith wasn't born when Daddy Rees died in 1952, but his discovery of that piece of wood, which the old man had written on, is another link which so easily could have been lost. And the photo of Daddy Rees that Ian Cox kindly gave me had appeared in Under the Edge back in 2002, and thanks to the magazine's archive being on the internet, those links haven't been lost. That's why the local history group would like to see as many images as possible of village life saved in digital archives. So we're starting by offering to digitise people's old photographs so that the owners have got a backup just in case the original gets damaged. And if they're happy to let us keep a copy or even pass one on to the Derbyshire Record Office, it's another step towards throwing some light on what would otherwise be one of Longstone's lost links.